In this presentation on opiates, I'm going to be covering, first of all, what they are, second, how they affect the body, and third, how big the opiate epidemic is in America. So, first of all, what are opiates? Now, you're probably more familiar with the term opioid, and these terms can be confusing because they are often used interchangeably or incorrectly, because there is no real need to have two different terms for a class of drugs that are essentially the same. Every substance that is classified under opiate and opioid is a chemical compound that interacts with specific receptors in the body, and that produce similar effects, such as pain relief, cough relief, etc. The opium alkaloids, which are the chemical substances that produce these medicinal and recreational effects, are often referred to as opiates. Opiates are the natural compounds found in opium from opium poppies. Opium, like poppy seeds, are obtained from the opium poppy. The latex, which looks like the milky sap of the opium poppy, contains up to 80 alkaloids, including morphine and codeine. The three main alkaloids of opium that can be used as they are or used to synthesize other medicinal compounds include morphine, codeine, and thebaine. Morphine is the most abundant alkaloid in opium and is most often used for medical purposes. It's used mostly to manage pain, but is important in deriving a number of semi-synthetic medications. Heroin also comes from morphine and is chemically very similar. Codeine, on the other hand, is found in lesser concentrations, and they are another important opium alkaloid used in medical compounds and to derive semi-synthetic compounds. In addition to pain relief, codeine is used as an ingredient in prescription cough syrups. Thebaine is the most toxic of all the opium alkaloids. It is used to manufacture important semi-synthetic medications. However, this is done sparingly as it is very toxic. These are the chemical structures of the three main opium alkaloids. As you can see, they look very similar. These three are used to make popular painkillers such as OxyContin, Percocet, and Vicodin. Some of these aren't actually naturally derived from opium, but are designed after the chemical structure of these alkaloids. But how do opiates affect the body? This is a close-up view of a synapse in the nucleus accumbens, which plays a central role in the reward circuit. Endogenous opioids, which are opioids produced by the body, work by activating opioid receptors on nerve cells. These receptors belong to a family of proteins known as G-protein-coupled receptors, or GPCRs. GPCRs are the largest family of membrane receptors and are therapeutically essential, representing targets for 50% of marketed drugs. Mu, delta, and kappa opioid receptors are the GPCRs of the nervous system. Scientists have always assumed that all opioids, whether produced by the body endogenously or taken as a drug, interact in the same way with opioid receptors. However, in studies done on mice, it was found that in addition to activating receptors on the nerve cell surface and in endosomes, opioid drugs also activate receptors in internal structures known as the Golgi apparatus and Golgi outposts. The different and more rapid ways that opioid drugs interact with these receptors may help explain their undesired side effects. In the picture on the left, the green dots are the opioid receptors, which are found on nerve cells in the brain, spinal cord, gastrointestinal tract, and other organs in the body. The opioid receptors are concentrated in areas within the reward pathway, including the VTA, nucleus accumbens, and cortex. They are also concentrated in areas involved in the pain pathway, including the thalamus, brainstem, and spinal cord, as shown if you compare the left diagram to the diagrams on the right. Normally, the opioids that attach or interact with these receptors are the endogenous variety that are created naturally in the body. Once attached, they send signals to the brain of the opioid effect, which blocks pain, slows breathing, and has a general calming and antidepressing effect. The body cannot produce enough natural opioids to stop severe or chronic pain, nor can it produce enough to cause an overdose. Opioids can activate receptors because their chemical structure mimics that of a natural neurotransmitter. This similarity in structure fools receptors and allows the drugs to lock onto and activate the nerve cells. Although these drugs mimic brain chemicals, they don't activate nerve cells in the same way as a natural neurotransmitter, and they lead to abnormal messages being transmitted through the network. Opioids targets the brain's reward system by flooding the circuit with dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter present in regions of the brain that regulate movement, emotion, cognition, motivation, and feelings of pleasure. The overstimulation of this system, which rewards our natural behaviors, produces the euphoric effects sought by people who misuse drugs and teaches them to repeat their behavior. Our brains are wired to ensure that we will repeat life-sustaining activities by associating these activities with reward or pleasure. Whenever this reward circuit is activated, the brain knows that something important is happening that needs to be remembered, and teaches us to do it again and again without thinking about it. Because drugs of abuse stimulate the same circuit, we learn to abuse drugs in the same way. But how do drugs that just affect the reward and pain pathways lead to a deathly overdose? Well, due to their effect on the part of the brain that regulates breathing, opioids in high doses can cause respiratory depression and death. An opioid overdose can be identified by a combination of 3 signs and symptoms referred to as the opioid overdose triad. The symptoms of the triad are pinpoint pupils, unconsciousness, and respiratory depression. As you may have heard, the opioid epidemic is only getting worse in America. But how big is it? In 2017, 130 people died every day from opioid-related overdoses. 11.4 million people misused prescription opioids. 47,600 people died from overdosing on opioids. 2.1 million people had an opioid use disorder. 886,000 people used heroin. 81,000 people used heroin for the first time. 2 million people misused prescription opioids for the first time. 15,000 deaths were attributed to overdosing on heroin, and 28,000 deaths were attributed to overdosing on synthetic opioids other than methadone. Roughly 21 to 29% of patients prescribed opioids for chronic pain misuse them, and between 8 and 12% develop an opioid use disorder. An estimated 4 to 6% who misuse prescription opioids transition to heroin, and about 80% of people who use heroin first misuse prescription opioids. As you can see from these statistics, the opioid epidemic, from natural opioids like morphine to synthetic ones like heroin, all starts with prescription painkiller opioids, and more needs to be done to regulate the prescription of these. Here are my references, and thank you for watching.